In the previous videos, we mentioned about the planning of your research, which is carried out in stages in order to attain your objective of your research study. The flow of the entire research can be presented in the flowchart to demonstrate the sequence of the stages as well as their relationship with each other. Then you will need to refine your planning to the data collection plan, giving you an idea how do you collect the data. You will need to do some preparations to ensure all the necessary tools and instruments are in place before you start with your study program. Next, we talk about the planning of the variables, which you know that they will be manipulated variables, which you manipulate it into fixed variables and the changing variables in order to observe the effects of certain parameters. And normally these parameters which you would like to study will be the changing variables. As the output of your study program, there will be responding variables as the most basic data as acquired from the study program. These responding variables can later be processed, derived, and formulated into derived variables, giving you additional information on the topics that you are studying. Then you will need to review your planning, both at the level of analysis. How do you intend to carry out the analysis? Where are the focus of your analysis? What are the critical aspects that you are looking for? And how you're going to present those data and results. After you have done all those plannings, you would like to know whether all the planned work for your research is sufficient for you to draw good conclusions to answer your research questions. Now let us proceed with the work schedule. Assuming that you have already identified all the relevant tasks to be carried out in your research, then you will need to break down them into the tasks as well as the milestones. The tasks needs to be quite specific, and it should be clear to you that the necessary things that you need to carry out within the stipulated time. There will also be milestones. The milestone represent the outcome which you can consider as a reference or an indicator for you to check your progress of your research. This milestone should also be specific, which upon achievement of that milestone, by referencing to the stipulated time to be achieved, you will know that whether you are ahead of the schedule or behind the schedule. Now you might want to ask, what is the differences between the tasks and the milestones? The task now is more to the progress phase, which is representing a process, as the milestones are usually more towards the outcome base, which is normally an output of a process or an significant output out of several processes. This work schedule is very important to you because you would like yourself to be able to complete your postgraduate study on time. A typical duration for a master study, it will be 2 years, specifically 24 months. And typical durations for a PhD study in full time, it will be 3 years, which is 36 months. You will need to know how much durations that you have for you to accomplish your entire research. And then you can construct the time scale. It is up to you to define the interval of the time scale by months or by weeks. but definitely it's not going to be by year. The time interval for 1 year is too large. It defeats the purpose of constructing the work schedule for you to monitor yourself. Normally we see the work schedule defined by intervals of months, which to me is just nice, because for 2 years program you will have at least 24 columns, and for 3 years program you will have 36 columns. Of course, you would like to go for a more refined time scale, which is by weeks. To me, this is a bit too refined, because you know that when you do the planning in terms of the work schedule, the tasks and the milestone here are the tentative, which are normally constructed based on the most ideal situations, and the durations that you estimate sometimes is not that accurate, as you might not be able to see the entire process that you have to go through in order to complete a specific task. That means planning for the work schedule itself has a lot of uncertainty, and most of our students, when they need to plan for the work schedule, that is probably the first time they handle their research project. There might not be a standard durations which is easily predictable to a very high level of accuracy in terms of the time required to complete a task. Therefore, if you use your time scale to be too refined, normally only when you are able to predict the durations quite accurately. Otherwise, you will see yourself to have very significant variations in terms of the actual progress as compared to the planned schedule. Now that you have decided your time scale in terms of months, and you have a list of the tasks and milestones, arrange those in sequence, and then you estimate the durations required for each task, and probably identify several milestones for you to monitor your progress. Find the logical sequence between the tasks, taken into considerations of the estimated durations. Then you will need to hatch several rows and columns for you to work out a work schedule. Something like this. Normally you will put certain milestone at the end of a certain task as a clear-cut definitions of completions of certain stages of your study. There is one more thing that you need to know about the work schedule. You know that the work schedule is designed for you to monitor your own progress, for you to have an idea the likelihood of your current progress to complete your research within the stipulated time for your postgraduate study. It is not for the sake of just constructing this work schedule to be presented to your supervisor and the examiner. In fact, you're going to revisit your work schedule from time to time, which most of the students do not do that. And this is the main reason why you observe most of the students, they are unable to accomplish their research program on time. Most likely, a typical postgraduate students may have a delay of their research by at least 1 semester. The functions of this work schedule is as a guide to you, which you revisit from time to time. You will know that whether you are ahead or behind your planned schedule. If you are ahead, that would be good. Keep up the pace. But if you realize that you are behind, you will need to look into the implications if you still keep with the current pace. To which degree it will affect you to complete your research on time. You might need to speed up your pace or redesign an alternative route for you to pick up and reaching the next milestone on time. Of course, there will be factors also due to your wrong estimations of the durations, which theoretically require longer time than what you have anticipated. This will delay the next following task, which in this case, you can either choose to revise your work schedule, doing some fine-tuning of the durations required for the following tasks, or you can choose to stick with the original work schedule, speed up the process. For whichever delay caused by the preceding task, you will have to speed up the following progress to cover back the loss in terms of the time, so that you keep up with the schedule and meet the milestone on time. If you wish to complete your research study on time exactly within 2 years for your master's, or exactly in 3 years for your PhD, you will have to come back and revisit your work schedule from time to time, maybe monthly or quarterly, or the worst case it will be half a year once. There is one more thing that I need to mention. Based on my personal observations, normally students underestimated the durations that they require for the writing and then for the review of their supervisors. Most of the students just allocate 1 to 2 months for the writings, and they forgot to incorporate the time for the supervisors to review their thesis. And this durations is significantly underestimated. You will find yourself to spend more time in writing because you do not expect yourself submitting your thesis in your first draft, which is nearly impossible even for those very experienced researchers. Even the professors, when they drafted their journals, nobody could achieve the official submissions of the manuscript by their first draft. I would say that this is nearly impossible. Therefore, you will have to estimate a certain amount of time for you to write your thesis, and then you have to allocate time for your supervisors to review your thesis. You're going to expect your supervisor giving you comment or reject your thesis, and then you have to reconstruct your thesis or rewrite your thesis or edit your thesis. This process requires time. I would say that conservatively estimate you will require at least half a year for you to write your thesis until to completions, which is the acceptance by your supervisors. This is one of the common mistakes by the students, which they only realize about that durations at the end of their research study. Carry out the research is one thing. Putting those in words with good discussions, covering all the aspects with adequate depth is another thing. Reaching to the expectations of your supervisor, it will be another thing. In fact, you're going to expect your supervisor to be able to review your entire research, gain full understanding of your research, only after you have submitted your draft of the thesis. Your supervisor cannot fully monitor every single progress of your research. Therefore, it will take some time for your supervisor to review your thesis. Another common area where the students may have underestimated the durations, it will be the preparations of the specimens, or when they are doing this computer modeling. As this process involves a lot of trial and error, which at the planning stage, when drafting the design, everything is on basis of the ideal situations. Very little will consider into the practical side, or having the full pictures, how certain things to be realized into the reality. There will be some time spent to explore those, trying and error until you find the solutions to achieve your designs. or if you are doing this computer modeling, or if you are doing this algorithm, or if you are doing this analytical modeling, there will be a lot of process of constructing, reviewing, validations, reconstructing, trial and error until you reach to an acceptable degree of reliability and accuracy. This is the task that you have high chance of overshooting the stipulated durations as allocated for that specific task. Therefore, when you want to plan your tasks, you have to take into the account in terms of the challenges or difficulty or the uncertainty that can lead to you prolong the durations of that particular task. It will be good for you to allocate slightly longer time, and for those tasks are easily manageable or have little uncertainty, then you can calculate them in a more exact manner. Try to arrange those. There is one more thing that I need to mention. When you do this scheduling, you will have to observe your capacity of handling different tasks concurrently within a month. Some students may have certain months to be fully highlighted with several tasks. For example, 3 to 4 tasks to be completed within that particular month, which this kind of schedule may look good to you, as you will see that your task has fully consolidated for you to finish on time, but practically it is difficult to achieve. Imagine that you have to fulfill all 4 to 5 tasks in 1 month. Which one are you going to do it first? You have only one person. You have only 8 hours per day. If you are hardworking enough, you spend some time to do your work at night. Probably you have 12 hours per day. It might not be practical for you to run 4 to 5 tasks concurrently, which at the end of the day, your planned work schedule is already off the ground, which not going to be realized in the reality, and this defeats the purpose of having the work schedule. So when you want to plan your work schedule, if you take into the considerations a few common mistakes that I have mentioned, you will realize that you do not have sufficient time for you to complete the research. 2 years, it will be too short for you to finish a research. 3 years is also quite short for a PhD program. Therefore, you shouldn't waste your time. If you are in the middle of your postgraduate study and then you review yourself now, if you find yourself quite free throughout the day or throughout the week, and this should bring you some alarm that most likely you're going to delay your research progress. No kidding, this is happening every day. And when you really taking all the points that I mentioned just now in developing your work schedule, you will realize that every single task here, you will have to do it seriously without wasting any time. You don't have much ample of time for you to daydream on certain simple tasks, as most likely it's going to consume the time that you require for other more complex tasks. Sometimes it is not really that you are ahead of the schedule. It could be due to the reason that you wrongly estimate the durations, overestimate the durations for simple tasks, and underestimated durations for a more complex task. If you realize this fact, if you have completed certain simple tasks which you find yourself is slightly ahead of the schedule, you should straight away enter the next task in order to buy time for those complex tasks. As you know that the durations allocated, it was normally done at the early stage of your research, which is estimated without having the full pictures of the things that you have to go through in order to accomplish a task. Other than this, there are certain remarks that you might want to know about this work scheduling. which you would expect your literature review should be scheduled almost throughout your research durations. That probably going to be the task which you need to on and off come back to revisit it. You do not expect you finish your literature review within the first few months and then never come back to the literature review. You should expect a postgraduate study, the learning will be on basis of the reading. For a 2 years or 3 years program, you don't expect yourself finish reading within 2 to 3 months. You have to read throughout your research durations. It will be depending on how you're going to manage with this literature review. You can set the time for you to regularly doing some literature review once every 2 to 3 months. And then you're going to make yourself, when come to the month of doing this literature review, you have to allocate time which cannot be compromised to do the literature review throughout your research study. You may require the first 2 months or 3 months to do the literature review, and then later you have to come back and proceed with the literature review, maybe once every 3 months. Also, you need to consider for the durations for the procurement and shipments of some materials or instruments. This normally takes times. The procurement requires time, as you need to go through the process of the applications through your institutions, justifying the needs, asking for the quotations, place the order, waiting for the shipments until you receive those materials or instruments. If you need those, you have to plan ahead. The most ideal situations it will be the necessary materials and instruments should have already arrived to your lab by the time that you need it. You will need to allocate at least 6 months for the writing and the correcting the thesis. If you ask your seniors who have just completed their research, you may ask them for the typical durations that they spend on writing and correcting the thesis. It is quite seldom for you to encounter any spending the durations less than this. In order to overcome this, maybe you can construct your thesis stages by stages instead of putting everything to the end of your research. For example, most likely you can start with the introductions as well as the methodology by the time that you start doing your experimental program. Because those things are more or less confirmed, then you don't have to put everything to the end of your research study. You may have drafted your literature review somewhere along the way of your research, and then at least you have your first 3 chapters, first few drafts ready, which after you have completed your experiment to the stage that you are writing the result and discussions, you can go back and revisit with your introductions, literature review, as well as the methodology. With some fine-tuning, you can submit certain chapters to your supervisor earlier for the review. This can buy you some time so that this writing and correcting part of your thesis is not significantly affect your work schedule. And then your milestone should be explicit, which is very clear. Upon achievement, you know that you have achieved the specific milestone, and this will serve as an indicator to you whether you are ahead or behind of the schedule. With that, I would like to emphasize again, doing this work schedule is not meant for presenting to your supervisor or examiner in convincing them how you can do a good planning. This work schedule actually is meant for you, which you need to monitor frequently, check your pace, and give you an idea not to waste your time during your research study. It is so that you are able to complete your research on time. I would like to challenge you, trying your best to complete your postgraduate program within the stipulated durations without any delay. Let's say now your master's will require you 2 years, or your PhD will require you 3 years. If you can complete your master's or PhD on time without an additional semester, you should be very proud of yourself. Not many students can do that. Try it, make yourself proud.